Senator Lacey from District 29.
Thank you. To debate the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't believe anybody here in this room has any Second Amendment problems. I think we all support the Second Amendment. We are Idahoans. We live in Idaho. We all have guns. We all shoot guns. And nobody will take our guns away from us. And over my time here in the Senate, and you've heard me talk about it in the House also, I've struggled at times about bills being correct and right and how I should vote on them. I think this bill is neither. Our university leadership says no. Our local police departments says no. Our sheriff's department says no. And sometimes I believe that this body feels that, we're all-knowing and powerful, and we are not. And I do know that Idahoans do not like top-down push, and that's exactly what we're doing. If the same thing was happening to us, we would fight it. It's just not the Western way. We need to listen to those who are involved. We need to listen to our presidents and the sheriffs. These are the front lines. And we talk about cost. If you're going to allow guns on campus, right now they're not allowed, so our security does not carry. If you allow guns on campus, there's going to be post expenses. We're going to have to arm these people because they know that there will be guns on campus. And then also the time must be paid for to get them, allow them to go to post and become training. Now, the only thing right about this bill, and I did find something right about it, and it's this timing. Elections are coming up very quickly. And anyone who votes no on this bill will be tagged as anti-Second Amendment, and anti-gun. And I'm sorry to say I believe that many here will be voting for the very wrong reason. This senator is listening, and I will be voting no.
So further debate. Senator Nuxall.
Mr. President, I just want to share a personal experience. I was at Gonzaga University, and every day I would go through the church to the cafeteria because the church and the cafeteria were no further apart than probably the width of this room. And for some reason, God permitting, I did not go. And I went around to the cafeteria and got my food and started to sit down, and all of a sudden somebody yelled to me, "Get down under the tables." And I don't like to be told what to do, so I did not do it. And I was probably the only one standing up, but I saw through the glass doors of the cafeteria the student across the street who had, well, I don't know if it was a student, but anyhow, it was a gunman across the street who had a gun. And so then I figured, oh, okay, I see what he's telling me. So I did get down under the table. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when it was all over, that person had shot 2 students, had killed the caretaker, had damaged the church before the police got there. And they think, from what I remember, the gunman was on drugs. And at that time, I sure wished there had been somebody there trained with a gun, one of the students or one of the teachers, to help prevent that bad event that I still remember. And here, you know how sad it is to know that those students were shot, the caretaker was killed, and so forth. And it just seems to me that those who shouldn't have guns have them, and the ones that should have guns are not permitted to have them on campus. So I am in support of the bill. Thank you.
So further debate. Senator Work from District 17.
Thank you, Mr. President, fellow senators. Thank you so far for the debate. I really appreciate it. And like the good senator from 29 had said, we're all supporters of the Second Amendment here. I'd like to ask you once to bring something forward to protect our Second Amendment rights that I can actually support. Because putting guns on campus is just plain bad policy. And that's what we're talking about today here. We've shifted, interestingly enough, the discussion to rights. Even the opening comments had to do with rights. That's not what the legislation says, and I'll get to that in just a second. It's interesting that this bill has something for everyone to oppose. For the first time in state law, we're going to actually limit where firearms can be carried. We're going to narrow the focus, and we're actually adding criminal penalties for folks that are found to be, I don't know what the rule is here, but I think it has to do with having some kind of alcohol on board. If you're a supporter of unlimited Second Amendment rights, I can't imagine why you'd support this bill. It seems not the way you should go. Mr. President, if I could, I'd like to read from Section 1 of the bill, which is legislative intent.
Senator may read from the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, the intent language says the legislature finds that uniform laws, regulations, and policies regarding firearms and weapons of the state college, on state college and university campuses are necessary for public safety. It is the intent of the legislature to provide for the safety of students, faculty, and staff of state colleges. Goes on from there. Interestingly enough, what we've had is a debate not about safety on campuses, a little bit maybe, but more about rights on campus, about rights of people to bear arms. And I would want to say that that kind of discussion regarding rights versus safety, I think it's an important distinction to make here. Because on our college campuses, what we want is safety. And I think we would all agree with that. We don't want students in harm's way. We don't want faculty or staff in harm's way. The interesting thing is that if we're looking for safety, then this bill seeks to allow guns onto post-secondary institutions to solve a problem that just doesn't exist. Violent crime on campuses. I'm not saying there's no violent crime. I'm saying that the problem on college campuses isn't a problem that this bill would even have a chance of solving. The premise, of course, is that adding guns, as a good senator from 14 stated, acts as a deterrent and would somehow make them safer. And we had mention of gun-free zones. So if it were true that these gun-free zones were made colleges less safe, then we would see higher crime rates on college campuses and in the surrounding communities. But in reality, factually speaking, that is exactly the opposite. College campuses are much safer places than the surrounding communities, despite what we're really talking about here is these catastrophic, very, very rare occurrences on college campuses. So let's take a look at the premise that campuses are targets for violent criminals because they limit the amount of guns on campus. And Mr. President, I'd like to read from an article titled, "Do We Really Need More Guns on Campus?" by David Skorkton and Glenn Altschuler.
Senator may read.
Thank you. Senators, they state, colleges and universities are far safer than most public spaces in the United States. The campus homicide rate is about 1 death per 1 million people, 1 death per 1 million people, compared to 57 deaths per million in general in the general population. In the college-age population in general, moreover, homicide is the second leading cause of death, while on college campuses it remains a rare event. I want to circle back for just a second, Mr. President, to the subsection 2, which adds an additional penalty for being drunk while you're carrying a concealed weapon. I just wanted to kind of note that, again, this is a new sanction that we're putting into Idaho law. We pay, Mr. President, hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxpayer dollars to hire people to oversee our post-secondary university institutions. And they've done a great job, since campuses are much safer than the surrounding communities. So why would we support a bill which strips all authority in all the campuses and all their different manner of which they exist in communities? Because none of our campuses are the same. Some people have alluded to open carry. If open carry were allowed or is allowed, then I question this bill basically would strip all authority from universities to regulate weapons, which means that whether or not it wasn't allowed before, open carry would be allowed on our university campuses, any place. And an interesting thing about the story that the senator from 7 just told is that if a person is open carrying a weapon on campus, how will you know whether that person means harm or not? How can you make that, how can you discern whether or not that's a problem? And how will security on campus be able to discern that as well? Mr. President, the other thing that concerns me about this bill is that if the universities are stripped of all authority regarding firearms, when there is a problem, for instance, with faculty, how will the universities be able to adequately respond if faculty members have the adequate paperwork? I recall the Bustamante case at University of Idaho. If there's another Bustamante out there that is carrying weapons and is threatening students and staff or anybody else, if you strip authority from them, how do they act to protect their community? You know, the bill kind of draws the arbitrary line at 1,000 seats for a venue for carrying concealed weapons, and I'd question that. Why not 2,000? Why not 10,000? And if you can open carry, why not be able to carry your AK into the Bronco game? Why stop at dorms? Are we safer with firearms? If we're safer than firearms, then why not allow them in dorms? Why make dorms the gun-free zone that the bad guy will go to automatically? I mean, I see no sense in the restriction if the idea is that there's some kind of deterrent that will make us safer if people carry weapons. And I would ask again why you would support that. How does this bill impact a diffuse campus like the College of Western Idaho or in the Treasure Valley? They don't have a campus. They have buildings all over the Treasure Valley. They co-locate with high schools. They co-locate in elementary schools. How does this impact their ability to do business? And where will people be carrying firearms then? Mr. President, so far nobody's talked about the indemnification in Section 5. This one really troubles me, because what it does, as far as I can tell, the indemnification basically says you're indemnified for everything. Universities, post-secondary institutions, ITech, you're simply indemnified for everything associated with firearms on your campus. Mr. President, those not held responsible fail to take responsibility. If we strip authority from them and then we indemnify them, how's that going to work out? What's going to be able to happen? What are they going to be able to do on their campuses to enforce order? The fiscal note, Mr. President, has been talked to about. I very much appreciate the discussion of the fiscal note, but there is no doubt that, for instance, the Boise State University, because we rely very heavily on our Boise City Police, that once there's an allowance in state law that requires them to allow concealed weapons on their campus, that they will be forced to arm their security on campus, all of their security on campus, which would be a very costly thing to do. There were questions raised a little while ago about enforcement. How do you enforce it? Because suddenly it's in state law, right? We put something in state law, we take away all the authority from them, but we place it in state law and say, thou shalt allow these concealed carries on campus. So now they need to enforce. It was mentioned, educators, will they ask students to identify themselves if they have concealed carry weapons? Will they require enhanced permit holders to actually register so that the campuses at least can keep track of who's carrying on campus? How do they enforce at a Bronco game? Is there TSA security that's required? Now let's talk a little bit about the policy again. Apart from rights, the bill states it's all about safety. As I've already discussed, campuses are much safer than their surrounding communities without guns. The addition of guns always makes places less safe. And statistically, that's absolutely truth. So is requiring campus carry a good state policy? Is there an instance in which a weapon held by a virtually untrained individual will result in an increase in safety? Remember, this person that gets the enhanced carry permit has one 8-hour training course, shoots less than 100 rounds in 5 years. It's not a lot of training. Mr. President, I'd like to read a little bit more from Do We Really Need More Guns on Campus by David Skorton and Glenn Altschuler, please.
Having identified the source, Senator may read.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, they state, in the Chronicle of Higher Education last June, Gary Olson, former provost of Idaho State University, stated categorically that there is no recorded incident in which a victim or spectator of a violent crime on a campus has prevented that crime by brandishing a weapon. As for the extremely rare case of an active shooter, we shudder at the prospect of campus police, who often do bear arms, rushing to a scene where more than one person is firing a gun. As Regina G. Lawson, Chief of Police at Wake Forest University, said in a 2008 conference on higher education law, when you're responding to a situation like that and someone's in plain clothes with a gun, who's the bad guy? Who are you going to take out to save the lives of the 10,000 other students you're trying to protect? Like all police officers, campus police would likely have a low rate of accuracy in such chaotic situations, given the likelihood that the officer is moving, the target is moving, and victims are fleeing in every direction. It's a chaotic scene. Time magazine reported in January that New York City police in gunfights hit their target 18% of the time. 18% of the time, highly trained officers hit their target in emergency situations. The average student, professor, or staff member carrying a weapon is likely to be far less accurate, substantially raising the odds of more innocent victims. Campuses are a risky environment for guns in other ways as well. We don't need to put firearms in the hands of college students, a cohort that includes emotionally volatile young men and women and abusers of alcohol and drugs. How many accidental shootings will happen under the influence? How many disputes will turn deadly if a gun is nearby? And they continue, if we seek to lower violence, then we need to fund added security, mental health screening and treatment, campus-wide initiatives to decrease violence. Allowing poorly equipped kids to carry guns isn't going to make anyone safer, and is likely to lead in added violence, fatalities, injuries, and intimidation, all in an atmosphere that is supposed to lead to an open exchange of ideas, even controversial ones. So we're talking now about that extremely unlikely situation where someone comes onto campus in order to cause significant mayhem. These are so rare, these instances, that you're probably more likely to get hit by space junk, but we can deal with them anyway, since that's what we tend to talk about. There have been experiments where people have been trained to respond to emergency situations, student-aged individuals, and then face a shooter in the classroom in a surprise situation. It all happens very quickly. It's very chaotic, and what they found is that those people that have just been trained are incapable of helping others or helping themselves. Again, we need to remember that even trained law enforcement hit their target about 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 shots, rigorously trained individuals. How will a lightly trained individual do under extreme stress in a life-threatening situation? 1 in 10? If that's the case, where do the other 9 bullets end up? Police officers, interestingly enough, are also taught restraint, right? They want to do no harm. That training could come in handy as well. Mr. President, it's a tough subject, and it's been raised a little bit, but I did want to touch on suicide a bit. It was touched on before, and I'm concerned about suicide on campus because that's where I think the real casualties of this bill could come in. Mr. President, may I read once again, may I read from College and Teen Suicide Statistics, the grim numbers behind adolescent suicides and attempts by Jackie Burrell?
Senator may read.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, experts estimate about 1,100 suicides occur at colleges every year. That's roughly 7.5 per 100,000 students, according to the American College of Health Association study in 2002. 1 in 12 college students has actually made a suicide plan at some point, and 1.5 out of every 100 actually have attempted suicide. And Mr. President, to read again from the Do You Really Need More Guns on Campus?
Senator May Reed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Consider also an even more compelling fact. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for college students after accidents. According to the Harvard Injury Control Research Center, 85% of attempted suicides using guns are fatal, compared to only 2% of attempts by a far more common method, which is drug overdose. If guns are more readily available, many more suicide attempts will likely succeed. If this bill passes, Senators, how many more suicides will result? How many kids despondent over love or grades or general depression on drugs or alcohol will gain access to a gun and end his or her life? And if guns are there, access doesn't have to be to a gun that they have. It can be to a gun that someone else has. So overall, Senators, and to close, thankfully, what does this policy that we're evaluating today serve? It doesn't serve local control, because we're stripping local control from campuses that look different all across the state. We're not serving the Second Amendment because we're actually adding restrictions. It doesn't serve campus safety because campuses are already really safe. You want to go to a safe place? Go to a college campus. It's not fiscally responsible. I would contend, as others have, that the fiscal note is inaccurate. And it strips responsibility by indemnifying the colleges and universities from every action. And I don't think that we who demand personal responsibility want to be going in that direction. Senators, I represent a college campus. I appreciate the concerns of everybody, and I appreciate the intent of everybody associated with this bill. I'm concerned that we are continually asked to go further and further and further in the name of protecting Second Amendment rights, that it's a never-ending continuum. My question to you is, if you don't say no today, what's the next thing on the continuum that comes to this body with the NRA behind it? Mr. President, I hope today that the senators on this floor will decide to take a halt and vote no on this legislation. Thank you very much for your time.
Is there further debate?